Thank you. Okay, so good morning, everybody. This committee meeting is being conducted on a hybrid basis in accordance with the Local Government and Elections Wales Act 2021, which will operate alongside the Council Standing Orders. Council Standing Orders and Code of Conduct will apply at all times, and members should conduct themselves accordingly. I remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public. Please can those attending online switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you are not speaking to ensure there is no unnecessary background noise. I also remind members to use the chat function to indicate to me when they wish to speak on a particular item. Please do not speak until I invite you to do so. A recorded version of this meeting will be uploaded for public viewing as soon as possible after the meeting. Welsh translation of the proceedings can be provided upon request. The images and sound recordings may also be used for training purposes within the council. Thank you. Okay. Agenda. Apologies. Are there any apologies? Okay, thank you. Declaration.
Chair, it's not a declaration of interest from me, but I seek advice as to how this should be dealt with. Item 6 on the agenda. My query is, has it been properly noticed in terms of we were given due notice it would be on the Forward Work programme? I, of course, note the reference to it in the previous minutes, but that's my query. Should it indeed be on the agenda?
Well, I would defer to Mike, but we did have a meeting. The intention is always, since it was raised in the last meeting, it was intended that this go on. The agenda item is for review only. There was nothing serious to be made today. There was a discussion. Okay, so that's all it's going to be today's discussion. Mike, can I defer to you?
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what you've said, Chair, really, which is that this matter is for discussion only. If there are items which members of the committee wish to take forward, the intention is that officers would distill those into a report for the committee to consider at its next meeting. So therefore, it's not a discussion to take a substantive decision. Obviously, it's been on the papers for the meeting, and as the chair says, it was discussed at the last meeting as well. So it's not something that's come out of nowhere.
We did have quite an in-depth discussion about this and how, if any changes were to be decided upon in the committee or to be put forward, then this would have to happen at a follow-on meeting. So this is a review of the decision that was made back in May last year or previous to May last year, and to look at how successful the change has been and whether the committee have any reflections on the decision or ideas going forward.
Henry, sorry. Yeah, well, I'm content that there will be no decisions coming today, and whatever comes forward will be an officer recommendation.
Yeah, it will be a committee. Well, the committee will make its view known today, and then officers will put what the committee suggests in a report in today's discussion into a report for the committee to take a more formal view on at the next meeting, if that makes sense. So it will be something that arises from member discussions.
Can I just seek clarification on that statement there? You said we take forward the views of members today, but it's only a discussion, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
That rather sounds, if we take forward members' views, that rather sounds if a decision, some sort of recommendation for a decision is going to be reached, which would go forward.
Well, that depends how the discussion goes, obviously.
I think there's two outcomes. Okay. Either the committee accepts that the decision was a sound decision and it's working as envisaged, or maybe it needs to be looked at again, because you can look at decisions after so many months to see whether it was a sound decision.
This is what was agreed.
It was agreed, but
yeah.
you can review it, and I think it's a healthy thing to do, to review decisions that were made in the past to see whether they are functioning as intended.
Thank you.
I mean, just to add to that, if I may, Chair, it is obviously the remit of this committee to keep those sorts of things under review. For balance, I would say if the consensus of the committee today is that no action is required, then clearly nothing will be taken forward.
Yeah. Thank you. Everyone okay on that? So declarations of interest? None? Minutes of the meeting held on the 20th November 2023. Are there any comments on the minutes? As a true record? You're proposing it, thank you. Seconded?
Yes.
Anyone against? Okay, so can we record these as a true and accurate record? Okay, item 4, scheme of delegation for assets.
So, paper on page 9 sets out some issues with the scheme of delegation for assets, which I guess is in keeping with the ongoing review you're doing of the Constitution anyway, to kind of modernise that, bring that up to date. We have a number of issues with the scheme for assets at the moment. The scheme is set at a very low bar financially, and those values have changed over time. So what was a value, 5 or 10 years ago is no longer an appropriate value for assets. We have looked at what other authorities have for their asset schemes of delegation, and to give you some examples, in Swansea the scheme is set at 250k and upwards, in Torfaen 100k and upwards, so we're way below kind of what our peers and other authorities have. We also have, if I refer you to page 11, on the left of the table is the types of things that are in the scheme. We've got some very specific details, kind of grazing animals, haymaking, that kind of thing.
I really like that one.
Really minor, you're really kind of minor things, but yet it doesn't cover other things that are really common. So way leaves and other permissions. It's dated, it's impractical. But the primary issue is a bit complicated and convoluted, and Mike has been very helpful in rewriting that in a better way. It is sometimes open to interpretation, and what it means is when we need to make assets decisions quickly and in common with other procurements, where usually you'd be looking at a value of near £100,000, it creates delays, potentially. We could lose opportunities. So I guess the other thing to mention is there are very significant officer controls around this. There's a strategic asset management plan. The review of that went to scrutiny in the last 2 weeks. There is a senior officer group that all services are represented on. There's a capital assurance group that reviews any major capital decisions. So there's already quite significant governance around all of these decisions, and this wouldn't change any of that. So what this proposes is, rather than that list of 7 or 8 different pieces of delegations, that we move to 3 real instructions, which are on the right of the table, which is briefly, without repeating everything it says on the table, move into a value of £100,000 for cabinet member decisions, and being more explicit about what we mean by the £100,000 for leases and disposals and acquisition of assets. Really importantly, we're not proposing we change the ward member element to that. So at the moment, ward members are contacted if there's an assets transaction in their ward or that's particular to their ward. However, we are proposing that is when it's relevant, or when there's an impact on communities. So I'll give you some examples of where probably wouldn't impact on communities, things like way leaves and permission to access a piece of ground. We've got some industrial estates, we've got some farms, as the haymaking suggests, and those assets decisions relate to those assets, industrial units and so on. They don't particularly impact on the board. So we're proposing we continue to consult with board members where it's appropriate, which again is in keeping with other decisions. All decisions are still made in consultation with the cabinet member, this proposes, and that all of the officer controls still exist. And the officer controls are then reported through capital reports to cabinet. So that's kind of the proposition. If the committee were supportive of that, it would obviously go to council for a full decision at next council. Top course of questions.
Do you know, I was thinking then, I thought I don't remember ever having been referred to about any disposal of assets or change of assets in any way. And then I thought, well, this must mean something because, you know, I've got city centre, haven't I? And then I thought, well, the only one I can think of is, I do remember, and it went out for a general consultation, was about the disposal of or change. It was a long list. The whole list was reassigned on the car park area on Hill Street. But I certainly didn't realise at the time that I was, you know, I thought I was just in the generality of everybody was being consulted at that. So this is this is an observation. I don't think. Have you ever, anyone else ever been referred to?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you would have been referred. I hope I haven't got it wrong now. Cardiff Road toilets, I think, is also.
Yeah, that's Stowe Hill.
So
Yes.
you would have been consulted on.
I don't remember that one. That's quite a long time ago now, isn't it? It might just slip my memory. It's years ago. It'll probably be going back to fairly close to when I was elected in 2012. Yeah. I mean, it's not
Recent
really,
than that,
you know,
but
this is
yeah, they
even
are in
gone,
there.
isn't it? Yeah.
There are in there.
But I mean, can you? I look through this and I see that there's delete clause is written fairly frequently down here, and I understand the more than not more than illegal. But can you point out to us new domains which are or identifications that have been added in that? You did say Mike has been through it as well, and he suggested.
Yeah, so if we look
changes.
at point 3,
Grant
as
and
was,
acquire easement service.
yeah, so on the right hand side,
Right.
to enter into grant, amend, surrender licenses, permissions, wayleaves, easements, and other legal interests. So that is I think I might have said, a very legal way of saying pretty much everything else.
Right.
Because other things could arise in the future, of
Right.
course.
Just a question on that one, sorry, as a supplementary chair. Is there a specific value of those which needs to be considered? Or are we talking about areas here, domains here, which don't have a monetary value that is being considered?
I'd say generally they don't have a monetary value because we're not really buying or selling there. We're giving permission for a thing or use of a thing. But if it impacted on the community, we'd expect the board member to be
Right.
consulted.
Right.
Two different things.
Yeah,
So
this is what I was
this
trying to
delegation
scratch
of
out of
offices.
this.
Yeah.
Because there is no definition of the monetary value involved, then how will those decisions be made about what to, you know, take back to the ward member or how to deal with it?
I mean, I would say those kinds of interests don't tend to have substantial monetary value. I mean, you can.
But they might have a substantial impact, I suppose.
Well, in which case, if you look at the box where there is an impact in the wards, there would be a requirement to consult with local ward members.
Right.
So that ward member consultation provision is
what overrides everything.
boxes. Yeah. So I mean, I think what would happen in practice is that if an officer wasn't sure about something, they would speak to the board members and the relevant cabinet member.
Yeah.
You know, because obviously where something is likely to be contentious, that generally speaking needs to be referred to members because they're the representatives of the community. But generally speaking, what this is designed to cover is very little. You know, if somebody wants to put a power line into Newport City Council's land, or if there needs to be a right to drive a vehicle along the council road or something like that, the vast majority of this is going to be very minimal things, which are just necessary to grant for kind of a day-to-day operation and functioning of various arrangements.
In that famous phrase, you don't always know what you don't know. I'm just a bit concerned that, you know, perhaps less experienced officers might come in new to the authority and just not realise perhaps the were implications. I'm just wondering how we make sure. I mean, these sorts of decisions always get passed through the line managers of officers who may be having an opinion on something?
Tracy will confirm this, but as I understand it, this is a delegation to heads of service.
Right.
So a head of service will
So
have
they
to
should
sign
have
off on that.
considerably more.
So two things, yeah. So even if even if the asset is not a kind of corporate asset, you know, it's used for social care or some housing provision or whatever that is, it would still need to come back to the assets head of service, currently be, but whoever that might be. That's the case now. But secondly, in the monitoring officer role, Mike and I are also looking at how such decisions are recorded, formally recorded, but there's no loophole around this, because in order for this thing to happen, legal eventually have to do something, and legal would have to be assured that that decision had been recorded in the right way. So let's say someone inexperienced didn't know that, the transaction couldn't complete anyway.
Right,
because they wouldn't be the
always got to
appropriate,
see it.
they wouldn't be the appropriate authorisation around that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm concerned about wayleaves in general, because I had the misfortune to be involved with them in other local authorities when they proved to be unenforceable. And I've actually had one of my own more recently, and the wayleaf must have been 120 years old. That was the age of the property. Somebody had allowed a street light to be fixed to it, and then 120 years later, changes ownership, and the resident says, I don't want that longer. But the council a great deal of expense just to remove that wayleaf and cause further problems. So my question really to Mike is, how robust are these wayleaf documentations, and would they actually stand up? You know, I know we've got a paper records problem. We haven't enough information going back, and it might be a very minor thing where somebody's being asked to agree with wayleaf, but then it's overturned by a change of ownership of the property or the land where the wayleaf is administered.
I mean, a wayleaf is generally a standard document produced by the utility company. There isn't a tremendous amount of scope to negotiate it. I mean, when you're agreeing to enter into a wayleaf, then obviously you've got to look at which part of the land the service is going to pass through. And it's incumbent on the officer, if necessary, in consultation with the relevant board member, to take a view on whether it's appropriate in that scenario. I mean, it might be to give power to a new housing development, for example, or it might be for a sewer or a water main or something like that. Obviously, whether it's still going to be appropriate in 120 years' time, I don't have a crystal ball, do we? No. I mean, the other thing that I would say is, if somebody buys some land that's got a wayleaf on it, that the caveat emptor applies, doesn't it? So you buy the land subject to what already encumbers that land, and really, if you're not comfortable with that, then it's for whoever's buying the land to do their due diligence beforehand and either accept it or do something about it, or not buy the land. So I don't think the council can, or any council can particularly be responsible for that circumstance.
It was more when council assets are being put onto somebody else's land. I'm sure if we're the owner of the land, we're not in good faith, even in 120 years' time, is when we get our assets on other people's land. Is the problem is pricing.
In terms of being able to pass services across other people's lands. I'm just trying to think of an example when a council would need to do. I mean, wayleaves generally are in favour of utility companies, Welsh Water, Western Power, those sorts of things. I can't think of an example of a wayleaf that the council would need to acquire over somebody else's land.
All of the examples I've dealt with have been our land, permission to cross our land, basically.
Sorry, just go back. It was when we've got a street light on somebody's wall,
Right.
and they decide they want rid of the street light.
Well, they're beholden to the documents that have been entered into and what's been agreed previously. And as I say, if they're a new owner and they buy a house with a street light attached to it, then they take on the property with that encumbrance.
That's not what happened.
I mean, I can't comment on the particular case, and it sounds as though that was a different local authority as well.
No, this authority.
You know, these things are highly fact specific. I mean, that's one example. These sorts of things are approved fairly often on an annual basis, and the vast majority of them are routine agreements that, as I say, are necessary to facilitate projects and developments within the community, and they pass without issue. you're always going to get the one outlier, I suppose, that you can't legislate for. But I think this would be an issue whether it was an officer decision or a member decision.
I believe that wouldn't fall into this part of the scheme delegation either. Because this part of the scheme, the particular part of the scheme delegation we're debating today, the scheme delegation obviously affects all areas, is council property rather than other people's property, isn't it? So I don't know that the streetlights would be used use this part of the scheme delegation, I'm not sure.
Obviously, I'm thinking.
You're talking about very old decisions.
Yeah.
aren't you? Yeah.
Obviously, it might be details out of committee.
Yeah, but just thinking of one of the areas which has recently come into Stonehill, so I don't know what happened historically, because it only came in at the last election in 2022. But Monbank was developed by Redrow. It's obviously got roads, it's got a power supply down the roads. And there was an issue where a car collided with a lamppost. As I understand it, it became unsafe. Yeah, I might take an interest because it's my ward, Chair. It is, yeah. And when I phoned up about why this lamppost was still in this red state, it turned out, I think the council had been no longer made it safe, so it was no longer live or a danger to the public. It turned out they hadn't actually informed Redrow of that. So, you know, thank you for just increasing my understanding of what a wave was, because I actually didn't know before. But I'm guessing that this falls into that situation. You know, actually, how do we maintain a relationship with the people who we need to work with on these things? Because I was sort of quite surprised about this. I mean, this may be something outside the scope of this document, but it just struck me for the first time. I realised there don't seem to be any obligations to communicate with these people who are at least stakeholders of ours, or we're stakeholders of theirs.
Yeah, I mean, as you've identified, the point of the discussion is to identify how the decisions are taken.
Yeah.
What happens after that is something that officers would deal with, depending on the circumstances and the situation. I mean, that's a very fact specific example, isn't it?
Well, I'm still at a loss to know what, you know. Clearly, somebody missed the point, and it would have been a good idea to actually communicate the damage and the need for repairs, which would fall back on Redrow, but it hadn't happened. I was informed when I made inquiries about this.
That is a different part of the scheme.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because this is about the council's land and the council's assets.
Well,
I know the example you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, I live there too.
Yeah.
But this is that. I think that's.
But we don't own that land, do we? But that would be. But all the granting of those permissions has to go through the council planning commission process.
Or somewhere, but not in this part.
Right.
So
right.
that example, I don't know about that example, but I do know this part of the scheme.
Right, it's not nothing.
This
That
is
would be
about
something that
the
we own.
council's land, the council's property, and how we make decisions related to the council's land.
An example of council's land, presumably, then would be the Hill Street car park.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
the Cardiff Road roadworks.
Or the Cardiff Road.
That's what I'm saying.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any questions online. Okay, so thank you for that, Tracy. So the proposal is that this committee proposes the recommendations as is in this report for decision by full council in April 2020.
Sorry, just is there any? Do we have any examples that are fairly recent examples of local councils going up, say, 150,000 or down as low as 50,000? No, you proposed 100,000. Other councils around here who have a lower threshold, or other councils local to us that would have maybe a bit higher threshold?
I don't think our current threshold is is 100 square metres or £1,000. There is nobody. I don't.
Oh, I thought I thought 100,000 was mentioned here.
The proposal is 100,000.
Yes, just wondered why you hit on 100,000. Because that's a big difference between 1,000 and 100,000, isn't it?
Yeah, which goes to show how
Out of date we were.
how out of date we were and how out of line we were.
Inflation
There are
is
there are many with there are some with unlimited, but 100,000 resonates with things like contract standing orders and other decisions such as procurement. So it felt a reasonable step for us in this council with all of our other arrangements and a not unreasonable boundary in terms of kind of significance of decisions. I guess it felt like a reasonable step for us.
And that 100,000 is a figure that's referred to in other policy documents which we adhere to.
Not to do with assets, but in terms of, for example, procurement,
Right.
contract standing orders. So it kind of had an equivalence in terms of value and significance. So what do you mean by significant? That felt like a reasonable step to make, but we could have gone further. I think if we'd gone lower, we wouldn't have put very much in it.
Yeah.
The 50k, say,
Well, it's the thing is
in property
Yeah.
terms or land terms today is too low. We wouldn't have
Yes.
really.
I think if I could add to that, I mean, the point of setting it there is to ensure that members aren't bothered, I suppose, by trivial day-to-day matters. And that it's the high value, more strategic matters that members are kind of freed up to concentrate on. I haven't done any detailed analysis of what goes on elsewhere. Tracy obviously has, but I mean, in my experience, I would say £100,000 is, if you look at the band of where councils have these things, I'd say 100,000 is probably to the lower end of that. And it's certainly the norm in other local authorities.
Okay, so patience, we'll be back next year.
Yeah.
Okay, so as per the proposal I read out, about taking this report for decision to full council in April 2024. Do I have a proposer? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. Okay. Happy with that? Let's move on. So, implementing the model constitution. Presentation
Presentation there for me, Simon.
I think he's opening it up.
Okay, so while that's just being loaded up, I've obviously picked this matter up, having been in post for a couple of weeks now. I've got a very short presentation just on the background to the matter and then the timescales that I'm proposing to implement this. I don't propose to spend too long on the presentation because I think committee members will be aware of the background to this. So, but if anybody wants me to expand on anything, then I can do. Yeah, we can have the first slide then. So just by way of a bit of background, since 2000, all local authorities have been required to have a constitution. And what the constitution does is sets out rules, policies and procedures governing how the council conducts its business. And that's a range of things such as the conduct of meetings, the conduct of members, procurement, finance and contracts, decision making, as we've just been discussing, that would involve the amendment to the constitution. But basically it's the authority on how the council conducts its business and makes decisions. There was a recent change arising from some 2021 legislation which required local authorities to publish guided layperson's language to the constitution on their website, and that I understand came before this committee either last year or the year before for approval. So that's been approved and has been published on the website. Next slide. Newport City Council's current constitution. It works, it's fine, it does what we need it to do, but it's a fairly old document. And in fact, it's a collection of documents. If you look at it on the council's website, it's a collection of PDFs. They're in different styles. They're all separate documents. They don't necessarily interlink to each other very well. I've got no doubt that constitution was absolutely fantastic when it was put into place, but the fact is that constitutions are living documents and they're constantly being updated in response to changes proposed by members, tweaks that monitoring officers make, and of course developments in legislation. So over time, that constitution has changed a bit, and I think it's probably reaching the end of its useful life. It's also quite difficult to navigate. I've got on there, as I say, because the different parts don't interrelate very well, and it requires review. So on that slide. What the Welsh Local Government Association did in around 2021 was that they commissioned Brown Jacobson solicitors to put together a template model contract essentially for Welsh local authorities, obviously reflecting the specifics of Welsh legislation in relation to local government, which by this point has become fairly divergent to the position in England. And also in response to the fact that a number of other Welsh local authorities would have been in the same position as Newport. And what Brown Jacobson came up with was the model constitution. So it's about 300 pages. It's a fairly weighty tome, but it's also very clearly written. It's got everything that it needs in one document. And in fact, what many Welsh councils have done, they took this through their democratic process in around 2022. So a number of other Welsh local authorities have already adopted this, have a constitution based on it. Next slide. As I said, it's a long document, but it sets things out clearly and logically. And I think, from my point of view, what's very attractive about it is that it's one document. It's not a collection of different PDFs. It's one document with a different section for each item in it, and I think that gives a lot of potential actually for the use of technology with it. So it's a requirement that the Constitution is published on the website. Actually, if we implement this, there's a lot of scope in terms of things like putting clickable links in it, and links to different parts of the document. I think there's quite a few possibilities around that, which will make it more accessible for officers, members, and of course the general public. The other key point, and what I'll come on to in a second, which is going to involve all of the work, is that of course this is a generic document. It needs to be tailored to the needs of the individual council, and to implement this, there'll need to be a lot of work done going through it, and obviously implementing the requirements of this council into it. Next slide. So, what I've been doing over the last couple of weeks is just reviewing how far as a council we've got in this process, and I think we're almost on a bit of a blank slate really, in terms of the Constitution needs the review. We've got the model document, so there's an ideal opportunity here to have a root and branch look at the Constitution and bring this document into being as a Newport City Council specific document. I've put a few timelines on here, looking at the next meetings of this committee. There's one in July 24 and there's one in September 24. Now, what I'm proposing to do, and of course members of the committee can discuss that in a few moments, but what I would propose to do is that I, as the monitoring officer, start going through this draft document and setting it out so as to import how we do things in our current constitution, reflect that in the new document, and then report that to members of this committee for discussion. Now, I propose to start that shortly and bring a report to this committee in July with an update as to how far I've got essentially in this discussion on any items which I'll highlight in the report and in the new document, which members might particularly want to consider. And then with a further report in September 2024, at which point I would hope to have finalised draft of the document for discussion at this committee. If members are happy with it at that point, next slide, the committee can then make a recommendation to full council that the document be adopted. Obviously, any change to the Constitution is a full council decision. It's for this committee to advise. In order to facilitate that, I'll be looking to provide reports in terms of what I've done to members of this committee about a month in advance, to give members the opportunity to read carefully through what I've done. Obviously, it's no good me providing something like that to you 3 working days before the meeting, because you have no chance of reviewing it. So I'll be looking to get it out a bit in advance. And as I say, with a view to making the referral to council in September 24. Next slide. Now, in terms of it going to full council, I've put November 2024 in there. Now, there is a council meeting about 2 weeks after the September meeting of this committee. My view on that would be, I think that would be too tight a time scale. First, in terms of if this committee wanted to make any changes to the agreed draft, there would need to be some time for redrafting. But I think also, once this committee's made a recommendation on the draft constitution, I think that needs to be given to all members really to consider ahead of the council meeting, because obviously they're going to want to have an informed debate on that at full council, I would assume. But assuming it goes ahead on that time scale, obviously if it is adopted by full council in November 2024, the next stage is that printed copies will be made available and the website will be updated, and then over winter 2024, start 2025, we'd look to finalise the implementation, I suppose, by publish rolling out some awareness sessions for members and for officers to inform everybody about what the provisions of the new document are. Next slide. And I've just put a couple of questions on here. I suppose the first thing I'd say is that is an ambitious timescale. I think it needs to be ambitious because I think this review of the constitution is a bit overdue from my point of view as a monitoring officer. And even having been in post for a fairly short time, there are a number of inconsistencies in it that I've noticed. For example, with regard to the standing orders for meetings, there are also a number of bits of legislation in there which are quite considerably out of date. So the constitution is going to have to be reviewed anyway. It seems to me to be an ideal opportunity to implement this at the same time. And I suppose the phrase is kill two birds with one stone, isn't it? There are other ways of doing it. It is open to this committee to appoint a subcommittee or a working group who could work alongside me more closely in redrafting it. I think the knock-on effect of that would be it would take longer. You may take the view, which would be my recommendation, is that if I report it to members of the committee in good time and there's the opportunity to consider it at these meetings, that might be sufficient. And again, members of this committee may have a view on the timescale that I'm proposing. I think it's achievable. It'll be tight, but we've got to be ambitious, haven't we? So that's what I'm suggesting, Chair, and I'd welcome any questions.
Can I even ambitious enough? The next meeting of this committee is actually in June, and you said July.
Did I say July?
You did June. It says June, so a bit more pressure, Mike.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, great. I'll see what I can get before June. That's a typing error on my part. But
Yeah, no, but these things can change anyway. So as we go. Okay, so it looks like it's a change of style and content. So a lot of it presumably will just be cut and paste. I don't know what percentage you'd say is already acceptable, and what percentage would change. Is it 80-20?
it's hard to say. I mean, having had an initial look at it, I think about 50-50. But the thing with the cutting and pasting is, I think we're going to do this properly. I think the bits that are being cut and pasted need to be reviewed as well. I mean, there's no point sort of.
But if we took standing orders, which we're all familiar with, yes, we live and breathe them. So how much of that particular section, or whatever, how much of that would be need to be amended? How robust are our standing orders?
From my point of view, I don't think the standing orders are too bad. I mean, there are a few things in there. For example, there's a bit of confusion around how long somebody gets to propose an amendment to a motion. One place says 7 minutes, one place says 3 minutes. Fundamentally, that bit of the constitution isn't too bad, so it would be a case of getting the text out of that and plugging it into the right section of there. But obviously, members may want to comment on that at the same time. And actually, as we're going through the process, it might become apparent that there are little bits that we do with tweaking as well. As I say, the standing orders, 20-30% perhaps. I don't think they're too bad.
Questions, Kate?
When did the Brown to bring this out?
I've got April 2022 here.
Right. And you said it was 300 pages approximately, didn't you?
Give or take.
Yeah, it does seem a bit tight actually. If we're going to, because you just said it, every paragraph is going to have to be read really to make sure that, and that seems quite tight with really just, I mean, that September meeting would just endorse it, wouldn't it really? So when would we be doing the work on this?
Well, like I say, I mean, my proposal is that I draft it, I send it to committee members about, well, I would aim to do it a month before the committee meeting. Members then have the chance to review it, and then we discuss it at this meeting in June and in September. I mean, there is an option if committee members, and I think it's a valid point, if you want to spend more time on it, we could elongate that timescale somewhat, and have reports to this committee in June, September, and after that November, with a view to it getting adopted by full council early in the new year. I think that would work.
So Mike, do you have any notion of how many man hours you would spend on this? You and others, well, would it be predominantly
It
you?
would be predominantly me. I mean, it's a monitoring officer job, isn't it? But,
So none of it's delegatable.
I may delegate parts of it as I come to it, but my intention is I would be doing the bulk.
Would you have a view of how many man days, weeks, months?
Not at this stage, no.
It's a little bit ambitious to have a time frame for work that isn't really scoped out in terms of the effort. I think given the nature of your job, yeah, and this is probably a lower priority than a lot of other things you do potentially.
It's a key priority for me, actually. I think this needs sorted out.
But there are still other firefighting things that come along. So I think it'd be interesting if you, I mean, the first thing what you need to do is, if you say it's about 50% that it needs changing.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
I think it'd be,
I mean, my suggestion, sorry to interrupt, Chair, but my suggestion would be that I bring a report back to this committee to update you as to how far I've got then. That makes sense. I mean, this is a presentation for information really, so the committee doesn't have to make any concrete decisions today. What the best thing to do might be is if I bring a report back to the next meeting, do an update as to the progress on that drafting, and I think I'm going to have a much better idea then of how much longer it's going to take. And also members will have an idea of how much input they think they need to have, because you might get my report and think, yeah, that all looks fine, or there might be a number of contentious things in there that you quite rightly want to air in this committee. Obviously, there's a finite amount of time in these meetings, so it might appear from that that you want to spread this over more meetings, so that there's a chance to debate it more fully. So, as I say, that was a suggestion.
and it also seems to me that that there's no halfway house, so you have to put in the new format, first but completed, to replace the standing, so the constitution as it is. There's no interim fixes on the way.
I don't think so. I mean, I think the previous suggestion that had been made previously was implementing the new constitution in a piecemeal fashion. Having looked at this and looking at this as one document, I think the danger of that is you end up with a constitution like what the council's got at the moment, which is a bit, I suppose, district. Yeah.
It's a big challenge.
Echo your points, Chair. I'm concerned about officer overload. And what's the driver that's putting these timescales in place? Well, we've had discussed on this previously. We've been assured that the Constitution would work. And there was a hiccup at the last council meeting, which perhaps should have been foreseen. I think the solicitor done well to get into 300 pages. It's had to deal with the council review of the Constitution, and that brought to 320 pages. So I think that was dealt with, and I'm suggesting this is what we should do. When the Constitution was given to us, and it was only given to us in one chunk, we only had 2 hours to deal with it. The officer who gave it to us dealt with the exceptions rather than the standard test. So, we've got to rely on our officers to tell us this could be a problem. And that's what I would expect from our officers, the committee. I think that was the way forward. So please don't kill yourself to deal with something that doesn't have to be dealt with this year. Most of the time, and we've got the presiding officer here this morning. I don't know if you're going to invite him to address this, but most of the time we get along, and it's on the very rare occasions that the Constitution doesn't let us deal with the business we need to.
And I guess there's no reason why, even this could take, whatever, that anything pressing could be changed in the existing constitution. Could it be?
It could be.
For example, the next item, at some point, if some changes were agreed as necessary, they wouldn't have to wait until the new constitution was available.
No, I mean, if a problem with the existing constitution came about, then I can report that through the normal means and get a change agreed to it. I think, as you say, Councillor Hora, there's not. The current constitution works, it functions, and we manage absolutely fine with it. It's just something that we do with tidying up.
I think that's quite a constructive suggestion, because I think you've been, I know you haven't been here that long, but I think you've been here long enough to get the flavour of things now. And I think you would be in a position to highlight anything which is on the horizon, or particular areas which need to be considered as a matter of greater urgency. And then we can go through perhaps the lower risk areas, at a later date. But I do think, yes, it does seem quite a chunk of work, and quite challenging to be able to get this through and be things to be adopted by the new year.
Yeah, I agree. As you say, Mike, it's a key part of your job at the moment to get this. But I think, as the councillors have said, is let's not rush it. You know what I mean? You're in the position, and we're ready to go. But let's not rush it. Let's make sure it's correct. If there are things that need to come back to us to discuss, then we can do that. It needs to be done right.
Yes,
and not, like they said, let's not make June as the defined date that you need to start report. If you've got something report, let's get it right. Yes.
Well, as a suggestion, that if I start making the necessary tweaks on this draft and I report back to committee in June how far I've got with it, we can always reconsider timescales then with that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Mr. Ryan, so what you said piqued my interest. You said about the presiding member is in the. Did you wish to say anything, or if you're observing?
I think we're just observing really, and I think it was quite interesting to what they really. One typical example that sort of came from time when the issue came up about voting of deputies. There was nothing in the constitution. It was only if you had no confidence in the presiding officer could you move someone from the floor. That's not in that constitution. So that was an obvious thing to me when I went through the constitution. There was nothing there about someone stepping in with the presiding officer unless they had no confidence in the presiding officer. That's the only thing. And that was an obvious thing when I started reading it through later, but I was too late then. So there are tweaks that need to be done, and I think
that's the point that was just raised about things. It could be tweaked on the way.
Yeah.
So thank you, presiding member. Thank you. Okay, so I guess we've taken that on board and noted in the minutes. Nothing else needs to happen. From a committee proposal perspective. So item 6, timely fashion, is review of standing order leaders' questions. And this is just
I'm sorry, could I just make a suggestion there regarding the forward work programme? Perhaps we schedule this in to the next couple of meetings, maybe one further, was originally proposed, just so we've got room in the agenda.
Yeah.
You know, is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, I've been very keen to deal with this today.
Yeah, no, I mean, what we've just been discussing.
Oh, sorry, yes,
Yeah.
yes, sorry.
Yeah.
So June, September and November.
Yes.
If that sounds.
That sounds like it. Yeah, members of content with that.
Yeah.
That would be useful.
Yeah, we don't want things to be
Sorry.
helicoptered into last.
Item number 6, review of standing order, leaders' questions. This is just a discussion. And on the timeline, I think it's interesting just to set the scope out of how we've arrived where we are. And before I was the chair last year, this was brought to the committee for discussion and proposal, which happened. And the existing.
Oh, no, I was just looking to see if Miami was online.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were.
No.
So this came to the committee last year, and the current form or the previous format for questions to the leader was defined as being quite unique. So it seems that each council has a different approach to allowing questions to the leader of the council. Okay, so where we are in Newport is quite a simple, or was quite a simple process where you get 15 minutes allocated to the leader to ask questions in a predetermined order, and that order is hybrid. So you get the first 3 questions are asked by the leaders of the opposition parties, the 4th goes to the current administration, and then the rest goes out for ballots. Okay, so that's the style of questions to the leader. When a question was asked to the leader, there was provision for a supplementary question to be asked. Okay, now my understanding is that this extended the time that it took to ask a question of the leader. The supplementary would basically should be for clarification, but it would lead on to extra issues and items. So this committee also last year reviewed this, and I think there were a number of proposals put forward, and the proposal that went to council and was agreed was at the time the 15 minutes stayed the same. The supplementary question would be removed from the council meeting, but would be could be written and answered offline in written format. So the main rationale for changing the approach was to allow more questions to be asked of the leader. Now here we are, almost a year on. I've looked at the meetings that we've had, and I've looked at the number of questions that have been asked. So 18th of July, when it was first implemented, there were only 2 questions asked of the leader. That was Councillor Evans and Councillor Whitehead. Run out of time. Then the following meeting we got to 4, then 4, and then 23rd of Jan back down to 2. So my contention is that although this was supposed to improve the fairness and number of questions to the leader, it's actually at best stayed the same. Therefore, it's just a discussion around has this decision actually made things more fair and improved the process? The other anomaly, there's 2 other anomalies that jump out at me and slightly related, is we've kept the supplementary questions for the cabinet members. Okay? We only have 10 minutes. And there's also another issue that I discussed with Mike, was that the leader is also a cabinet member with a portfolio. So what is the provision to ask the leader a question about their portfolio separately from them as a leader? Should there have been another 10 minutes allocated for that? So it's really a case of, let's try and be clear of where we are, and did the decision made last year actually achieve the desired result? And that's the discussion for today. People may have opinions, they may not. So does anybody want to open the discussion?
Clarify one thing, Chair. I'm just looking at the standing orders, and what it says about questions to cabinet members is that this process will be followed for questions at council to other cabinet members, committee chairs. So my interpretation of that would be is that the leader, as it stands, the leader only answers 1 set of questions.
In the board as leader.
Yeah. I think the use of the word other in there indicates that there wouldn't be a separate opportunity to ask questions to the leader as a cabinet member. So I just wanted to clarify that before the
So just to clarify your clarification, is possible for a member to ask the leader in a cabinet member role with the
No.
portfolio? No.
No.
It isn't.
Well, they could, but they would have to do it during questions to the leader.
Okay, that's what I thought it was originally. Okay, so there is no opportunity to challenge cabinet, to get that extra 10 minutes for the cabinet member role. Okay, that's fine. So that's the scope of the discussion, and I just wonder if anybody has any observations, because unlike myself, quite a few of you were on the committee back in the day when the recommendation was made. So anybody want to open up the discussion?
I will.
Comment? Hello?
Hi. I don't mind.
Thanks, Emma.
Good morning. So looking specifically at the questions to the leader, obviously the format that we have isn't dissimilar to PMQs. It's a ballot. Opposition leaders are all given a chance to ask their questions. We have seen, and this is obviously, we're cross-party here, so, you know, we can look at things objectively, but from a local member perspective, there are other routes for people to ask questions. You don't have to wait the 6 weeks or whatever between council sessions to ask the leader a question. You can put in a question at any time. So although that time limit is limited to 15 minutes or whatever, that isn't the only opportunity that the opposition or anyone have to ask a question of the leader. So I think that's really important to impress here, because I feel that maybe the disinformation that has surrounded this has pictured it in a sense that 15 minutes is the only time that the opposition have to ask questions of the leader or the cabinet. So I think that's really important that we make that clear. So this 15 minutes isn't the only time. And in the number of times since we passed this at the committee, we have seen an occasion where Councillor Evans decided not to ask a question. So maybe this isn't actually that valuable. Maybe the 15 minutes is enough if we're able to give away that one slot to try and make a point or grandstand, when what we should be doing is representing the views of our constituents and our residents. I don't understand why we're having this conversation again, because maybe it's not actually that important to the opposition. There's always an opportunity to ask a question to the leader. They could put in questions at any time. We all know this, and the same goes for cabinet. There's no lack of democracy here. I just think, again, we just need to be mindful of doing the best for our residents. And why would you want to wait between council sessions to ask a burning question? If you've got something you want to ask it in between council sessions, and use your time at council as well, instead of wasting it. Yeah, that's just how I feel. And obviously as well, we see from opposition parties a use of the FOI, which is absolutely fine. You know, opposition campaigners, that does come at cost to the council, which I think should be acknowledged as well. There is no lack of democracy here. Questions are asked, questions are answered. And I think that's really, really important. And as I said, as members, don't wait the period in between council sessions to ask your questions. If you've got something you want to ask, do it at any time, using a question at any time. Thanks.
Thank you, Emma. A couple of points on what you said. First of all, the questions to the leader are not just for the opposition.
Oh no, but opposition are given priority. Like Matthew is, Councillor Evans is given. He's always the first one to ask, isn't he? In the draw, you know, that's an option. Yes.
Explain that at the beginning. There is a process that gives the opposition, the three opposition leaders,
absolutely.
And
you'll agree that the question at any time is open to all members. So we don't need, if we've got a question that's burning that our residents really want the answer to, we don't need to wait for the next council session to come up to ask a question of the leader.
You're absolutely right. The standing orders does talk about questions at any time. Yep. There's also an opportunity to email informally. So there's a whole range of
published as well, aren't they? The questions at any time are published as well. So there's no lack of democracy or lack of will to answer or support here, I would suggest.
Might have we might have read that into the discussion, but it's not about a lack of democracy per se. It's about process that we have, and is that process actually giving good value? And the word fairness was used when the council asked for this committee to look at the questions to the leader. Is it fair? Okay, go back and read the minutes of January last year.
Absolutely. And obviously we agreed that as a cross-party committee last year. And in terms of the supplementaries, that element was agreed as a cross-party committee as well. And as I understand, only one supplementary question has been submitted in writing. I might be wrong there since this was brought in. So just, what's happening there anyway, that's just my 10 pence.
And that's it's more than 10 pence, but I think it's worth more.
It's my tenner's worth.
Okay. So I've also done a comparison of the questions to the police, and maybe arguments are as valid to the police. So we had 8 questions in July, 10 questions in September, 8 in November, and 5. So I think all the arguments you say about asking questions to the leader just as valid to asking questions or making comments to the police. But the point here is that this is an opportunity for the public to see democracy in action and to see the dynamics of the democracy in action. So I don't think the question is we want to get rid of this process, but it is the process as fine-tuned as it could be. And it's only a discussion. It's not about, Councillor Evans, if somebody decides not to ask a question, Matthew Evans, and said, I'll give it to one of the backbenchers, that's fine. That's fair. I mean, that's it's not showboating. I think that was the word you used. It's not showboating or whatever. It's opening it up to fairness. What we want to see is democracy in action, as well as it can be.
Yeah, but I do think it's incumbent on members to be, sorry, to add another 10 pence worth, to be upfront and to ensure that the public are getting the correct information in terms of members can ask a question at any time to the leader, and those can be published. Those are published in writing, and they can be shared. This isn't the debate has often been framed that this is the only chance, and I think it's fair. A fair thing for us to do for the public is to ensure that they know that this isn't the only chance people have to ask a question to the leader. And I think I just want to make sure that that comes across, because I do believe that's important. We all have a duty to tackle misinformation, especially in this day and age where politics is, quite sparky, shall we say. So I just needed to make that clear. Thanks.
And that's appreciated. I think Cardiff, for example, you say Newport's unique. I think every council is unique in the way it approaches this. I think Cardiff allows members of the public to ask questions for council. So
is that right?
I believe so.
Oh, I'm very surprised if that was the case.
I looked at Cardiff, Swansea, some others. It was quite a while ago now, but I think it was Cardiff that stood out in its own unique way. So as it stands, we're just reviewing it. I don't think we need to get too emotive about it. Does anybody have any thoughts? Are they happy with the way the process is working or not?
Yeah, I didn't understand your point about the questions to police. We had a meeting recently with the Deputy Chief Constable in Gwent. All councils were invited. So, and do you recall towards the end, it made a police station.
Oh no, sorry, with inspectors.
So that was interesting. Yeah, we met with the Deputy Chief Constable. All the councils from the bodies were invited, and one of the things we talked about there was how difficult it was for the police to get across their message about a lot of good things that they're doing, so that they never get reported. We rely on the local press to report what's in records always happen. So I hate to think that there's a proposal going on to reduce the police involvement with the council. We really do need to support the police, not just ask them maybe pointed questions.
my point was, I suppose I was comparing and contrasting. The police gets 30 minutes to be asked questions by members. And the number of questions that do get asked, I did compare and contrast. And they're not always questions, by the way, they're comments or they're thanks. So, but the interaction between the police and the members, I think, is very good. The time allowed is 30 minutes. So it's, I don't think this is loaded. This is just the opportunity to have a discussion about whether we think the process, the amendment to the process, has actually given the desired results. Mr. Sterry.
I don't think the amendment has helped at all, basically. As you pointed out, it's there. We've got there's been no further questions asked. Yeah, I voted for this originally because I thought it's alternative, it might work, but we tried it, and from our point of view, it doesn't seem to work. We don't get in, there is no extra question being asked. Because we've cut it, the second question then, if you like. Supplementary, yeah. As you pointed out, sometimes there's two questions have been asked in a 15-minute time frame. It's there for a reason, and we just want to use it properly. Use the time properly. The original if I recall correctly, the original requirement was extended to 30 minutes. That was from it, and then the supplementary was going to drop, try and give more members more questions to go in, but it hasn't worked. Clearly, it hasn't worked.
Okay, so does anybody else want to make some comments on this?
Well, what are the points about questions to the police?
Only to compare and contrast.
Yeah, and that's obviously, that is 30 minutes, isn't it? But I mean, it's the people who question have selected an entirely different way. I mean, that's very much first come, first serve, isn't it? It's whoever's hand goes up first.
Yes.
And so, I don't really find them comparable in terms of representation. It's been decided that the allocation of those questions to the leader should be in terms of opposition parties having the first, in being entitled to ask those questions firstly, and obviously the main opposition party always, Matthew always has the opportunity to ask the first question. Now, as regards the, we've just heard there's only been one supplementary question asked. It has to be considered how important do members asking questions consider those supplementaries to be if only one has been asked. And
in written format.
Yeah, and we do know opposition parties do put in any time questions in writing, and some of those, I think they're all relevant and appropriate questions that are being asked. Those are answered. It might not all get, we know as councillors we can't always give the answers that our constituents might want. It's a hard lesson you have to learn when you're elected member. But those questions are answered. But it just strikes me, if only one supplementary question has been asked in the time that this policy has been implemented, how important is that? Or is it really seen that this is an opportunity perhaps to just get our party point of view across to a wider constituency on, when it's broadcasting the way it is? Be nice to think actually, that when we made comments and observations and we discussed the less exciting issues to do with council business, the committees like this at the public tuned in, but I don't really believe that the numbers are so substantial that we can make that point.
Okay, so I suppose the contention that Terry's making, and maybe I support, is that although a change was brought in with the rationale of increasing the number of questions, it doesn't actually apparently achieve its goal. Are people happy with that? Are people on this committee happy that they made a change that made effectively very little difference?
No, I think from my own point of view, I got it wrong.
Oh, you supported it at the time, yeah, right, but now, and clearly supporting it at the time, there's nothing wrong with that, you know, and it on paper, like a lot of things on paper, they look like they're going to make a big difference. The feeling I'm getting back from the committee is that leave it alone, it's fine.
I think we should be very proud that we've introduced a new way of representing democracy to the residents of Newport. As we have already established, no other council puts itself in a position, or leader puts itself in a position where they will take on questions which they have no forward notice on.
And historically, how far back, I wonder, was this, because there's been questions.
Well, when it was first introduced, we were, and I believe we're still on St Council, and I don't understand the point about the members of the public being able, you know, that would seem to be, I mean, I really don't know, I'm not aware of them doing that in Cardiff, but it would seem to me a rather odd way, and it bypasses the whole process of being an elected member on behalf of your constituents if you just allow members of the public to turn up. I mean, members of the public can turn up and ask questions. You don't even know whether they're actually residents in that city. It just seems a bit strange. I wasn't aware of that.
I think you're taking the point to heart. It was just to compare and contrast. And a more simple way of putting it is that each council has a different approach. Right? Forget the details.
Well, I think most councils don't have a different approach. All the rest of them have the same approach. We won't subject our leader to being put on the line by asking questions which are not prepared for. But in Newport, we implemented this, and I feel that it's been an asset to the democratic process of the city.
Yeah, if I might say, I think you're putting the officers in somewhat of an impetus position because they've been asked now to consider the debate of this morning, and then from there determine our way forward. So we can't turn this into a vote as you were indicated originally. You heard from two very vociferous of your councils, Derry, also is three benefit, and Councillor Gordon has been again quite vociferous. Councillor Thomas has said something. I think I need to say something so as we get balance. And I'm content with the status quo of no. So we've had somewhat of a ballot already.
Well, I don't think you can have a discussion without giving your opinions. My feeling is that basically we're not going to get any change. We're not going to get any change. We looked at the where we are today, and it is what it is. I think what I'm hearing, that necessary, it is what it is, and therefore there's no appetite to change it. That's what I'm hearing.
Sorry, I think that's a bit of a misrepresentation. I don't think any of us have said it is what it is. I think what we've all said is that this isn't the only opportunity people have to ask a question of the leader. And I think that's important. There are other mechanisms, there are other levers that members can pull to get the answers that they want for their residents. And that's the most important thing here. And waiting 6 weeks to ask a question that your resident wants you to ask isn't the best thing for the people who vote us in. If you've got a burning question, use that question at any time function. And yeah, ask questions at council because they're important and that's what the time is there for. But that's not the only lever we have. So I just feel that that's been misrepresented. None of us have said it is what it is. What we've said is that isn't the only show in town. That's what I've said anyway. And I think that's important. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify that.
And I appreciate the clarification. I think everybody here is well aware of that situation, and I think it's just the wider public who may not be aware that there are other vehicles for dialogue.
And we all have a responsibility. Sorry, Kate, we do all have a responsibility to ensure that we're sharing that information.
But you mentioned the public there. I think maybe the public aren't aware. Actually, we are the only council, who actually have a leader who is prepared to answer questions for which they in no way can be, forewarned or prepared.
Yes. And that's been a long-standing historic.
No, it only goes back as far as it was something that was introduced by Councillor Wilcox. It's only what, how long ago?
Sorry, Chair, when we first became councillors, we didn't have questions.
No.
This was brought, Councillor Wilcox was on Hastings in Newport prior to the 2017 election, where she made a commitment at an open Hastings to take these questions in council. Prior to that, was
Prior to my time,
Yeah.
it was.
No, the first 4 years we were councillors, we didn't have questions.
Yeah.
From 2012 to 2017, we didn't have questions to the.
I don't know what happened before that.
Oh, no, I'm sorry.
Necessary.
I'm not saying that we're changing anything. All we're looking at today is, we know we've got questions at any time, etc. All we're looking at today is of what we put in place, has it worked? And from my point of view, it hasn't, because we haven't got, there's no more questions being asked in that time frame by taking out the supplementaries. So that's why I'm saying that it hasn't changed for any better. My point of view. That's what we were trying to do. Originally, it was supposed to be half an hour questions to the leader. I said that wasn't agreed. It was agreed that we stick with the 15 minutes. There will be no supplementaries. That should give more councillors more questions to the leader, and that hasn't happened. So, from my point of view, the review of the 12 month, what we put in place was that one.
Okay. Healthy discussion. Mike, can I ask you what your takeaway is from this discussion? Is that putting you on the spot? Sorry, but
No, it's not. I think, I mean, obviously, it was on the agenda for members to discuss, I suppose, how they think the changes have gone, whether they would like to consider any changes going forward. I suppose what I'll be asking the committee is there an appetite for me and my team to put together an options paper for this committee to consider at its next meeting? And if it is, then what options do you want to see in that? Or is it in the alternative, the consensus of this committee that that no changes to the standing orders are necessary around leaders' questions?
We were rather getting into a situation here where we have to do a not official vote on this, aren't we?
Yeah.
From my point of view, and the way I think I'm willing to participate in the discussion today, I do not feel any changes are necessary. And you don't need to prepare a report.
I have to echo what the councillor Courtney said about asking the leader questions at any time when they wish, and I'm sure the leader is very approachable, where people can go to her office and see her any time and speak to her instead of waiting for 6 weeks. So my opinion is that keep it as it is, either that, take them away altogether.
okay, well, it's a strange one. It's only a discussion. I think some of the messages that come back have been valuable. I appreciate what Councillor Gordon said, because yes, there are other ways of communicating. So,
We've always had this. We always had the other ways of communicating. Nothing has changed on that. The only change was to answer the question at council meeting. That was the only change that was put forward. So anything else is irrelevant, because we had all that before anyhow.
I think respectfully it's not irrelevant, because the way this debate has been framed over the last year is that democracy has been stymied because there are only 15 minutes at council. Democracy has not been stymied at all, because we can still ask as many questions as we like. And we should be serving our residents best and not showboating at council and saving these questions. As I've said a couple of times, if you've got an urgent question, needs an answer, get on it straight away. Why wait the 6 weeks?
so can I ask you a question, Emma?
Yeah, go for it.
Why do you think this was brought to the committee last year to reconsider?
I think I don't really know. I guess it was driven by the opposition. I'm not entirely sure, but we are where we are now, and it's working quite well. There clearly are no supplementaries, so we're not missing out on anything there because we've only had one supplementary in writing since then. So the supplementaries taken away to give them more time. The supplementaries clearly aren't an important factor in all this. And like you've said, we've had 4 questions. 4 questions in 15 minutes is less than 4 minutes a question. And we want our residents to have full and frank answers, don't we? We don't want them to have 1-sentence dashes and there we go, we're done, so we can bang through the questions. And we don't want our leader, like we see in PMQs, giving answers that are just sloganisms and don't actually answer the questions. We want to see full answers to our questions. So three and I don't know, do the maths, 3 3/4 minutes per question, as we've had in some council meetings, gives the chance to give a lot of information, don't you think?
I do agree, but I think the reason it was brought to this committee was to give more fairness and to allow more people to ask questions rather than the famous 3.
Can I suggest, Chair, that it was actually about that the opposition parties actually wanted it extended. They wanted 30 minutes.
That's almost what I said. It was to give people more opportunities to ask questions and not just the 3 that tend to.
The then chair of this committee was flying a flag this time last year. He determined that he was going to push this to debate. So it didn't quite work out in the way it was expected. All of us that there's no appetite for change, and 2 of you were saying that it is an appetite for change. I think we let the officers off having to become the arbitrators of this, really, because we're having no vote this morning, but we've had a clear opinion. Forward with that, there's no changes needed.
I think the only outcome we can get from this is that at some point in the future, whatever that is, this can be revisited.
As it should be, Chair.
Yes, as it should. At some point in the future, it should be revisited. So,
yeah, I was just looking at the standing orders while those contributors were speaking. There is scope for motion without notice to amend opposite motion to the council. So I think there is a way you can put this to a vote, but it seems to be, Chair, that you're moving towards a consensus.
yes, which is why I said we are where we are.
It might be helpful if you're that way minded, Chair, to suggest an actual date when this is revisited, if that's the way you want to go.
I think that at the very minimum, we'd have to allow 3 months, but I think I will leave it.
I think it's going to get very tedious.
I think I'll leave it to the new chair.
If we have to keep on going through this every 3 months.
No, I say we don't need to go through it every 3 months. We can monitor it with the up and coming changes that we can be expected. We will monitor it and see if the situation changes itself.
As you said that you will no longer be chairing this committee in the future, congratulations on your morality.
As opposed to
That's the right word. Coming up. But if we sort of leave it that loose, we may well find that it's back here and we're wasting officers' time in just as short a time as 3 months. I would be happier if we knew, say, it's going to be revisited perhaps in 12 months. But I mean, it might be one of these things which is actually best left till after the next local government elections. When there'll be, clearly inevitably there is churn in membership of these committees, and see what the consensus is at that point in time.
I only mentioned 3 months because I thought that would be the absolute minimum, not the recommendation.
Yeah,
I think it's been an interesting discussion. We all retain our own views, I think, and just note it as a discussion.
Yeah, I mean, you've got the forward work programme later on the agenda.
If somebody wants to
consider as part of that.
Okay. Well, okay. Thank you, everybody. Moving on. Member training.
Thanks, Chair. This one is with me. So the committee has a requirement to ensure that members have access to a reasonable level of training and development. So this update is brought to the committee on a regular basis. I know some of the members that have been in the committee for some time would have been part of the group that put together the curriculum for the induction of newly elected members following the local elections in May 2022. So as you may recall, that initial curriculum was somewhat based on the WLGA suggested seminars. There was some adjustment for local requirements, and then that was implemented throughout 2022 and part way through 2023. We did share an update with the committee last year on almost a full year of that induction programme. So you might recall that there were initially sessions on supporting members to start in the new role, essentially. So looking at technology, how to join and participate in meetings. There was key training on data information security before members could have access to their accounts. And there were also introductions to the role and code of conduct as well. The induction then moved on to key legislation, so looking at things like the Equalities Act, Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and safeguarding. And then there were also some more in-depth sessions which focused on some of those equality topics like fairness, violence against women and anti-racism. The feedback from those sessions was really positive, and members expressed interest in attending more sessions in the future. As you're aware, councillors, one of the key aspects of the role is to deal with the issues and concerns of constituents and manage the casework. So there were also some sessions focusing on that, so supported by heads of service who came in to talk about their services and their key policies. So this was areas such as environment, public protection and housing. Housing was also followed up in year 2. So I know we had another session which looked at more in depth around the bidding system and how residents are supported through that process. There was also some support work for members on the budget setting process, so a session on finance and treasury management in the first year. And again, that was followed up before Christmas just gone to provide a refresher on that for members before the budget setting process came through again. So some of the training provided was repeated on a few occasions to allow maximum attendance possible. So carbon literacy, which was facilitated by an external provider, so aiming to support councillors with the knowledge and skills to tackle climate change and to reduce carbon footprint. Similarly, a session on the obligations and responsibilities of members under the Data Protection Act and the General Data Protection Regulation were arranged throughout the year in the second year of term. Moving on, councillors also received training on the introduction of the 20 miles per hour speed limit, and the aim of that session was to support members to be able to answer questions from their constituents throughout the change. Another important topic on changes that were coming through was on the FLICE arrangement between health and social services. So that training was provided to councillors to explain the partnership agreement between the local health board and the 5 local authorities in Gwent. I think in the autumn then last year, we did some work on scrutiny support and development. So there were a number of sessions which the WLGA facilitated for us. So there was a session for chairs, which we had full attendance for. And then there was also a session for scrutiny committee members on effective scrutiny and a follow-up one on scrutiny questioning. We also received seminars from the Council's Education Service. So the sessions covered statutory duties and responsibilities of the Council and schools regarding attendance and inclusion, and also the challenges and opportunities of addressing poverty and inequality within education settings. Towards the end of 2023, elected members were provided with an update from the South Wales Fire and Rescue. So this looked at their budgets and service priorities for 24 and 25, 2024-25. And there was also a session on the strategic economic partnerships that the council has with the Cardiff Capital Region and the Western Gateway that highlighted the priorities for the partnerships and forthcoming changes as the arrangement transitioned to the South East Wales Corporate Joint Committee. The final session that this report covers was the personal safety session delivered jointly between civil contingencies and the police. And council has had the opportunity to ask questions there and learn more about the resources and support available to them. So there is a summary of the training right quarter for the 2 years, as you can see. And then the report moves on to attendance for the second year, because attendance for the first year has already been brought forward to committee. So as you can see from the graph, the attendance was best for the training for scrutiny chairs, which I've already mentioned, although attendance at the other sessions for scrutiny support was lower. There were few attendees at that. Another one which had good attendance, but we are looking to focus on it again within the coming year, was data protection and information management. So almost 3/4 of our elected members have attended that so far. So having some sessions still to go for the rest of 2023-24, we've still got topics to deliver on the Elections Act, further updates on education. We're also looking to provide a refresher on code of conduct, as we're conscious that it's been 2 years since of the training for some of our members that went on the first cohort. We're also looking to dip back into the Welsh language awareness, and then have social services provide some support around the Mental Capacity Act and deprivation of liberty. We're also looking to provide sessions for members to support with complaints handling, and also develop the understanding of performance management within the council and how that fits into the overall governance and democratic framework. When we spoke about member training last with committee, one of the suggestions that you had was to carry out a survey with our elected members. So to try to find out a bit more about how the experience of training and support has been for them, and to give us some indication of how they would like that to be managed going forward. So I'll just see if I can share my screen and put the presentation up. You just move that around, won't be a second. Apologies, technical difficulties. I had it right the first time. Okay. There we are, that's better. So this survey was carried out in September last year. First thing to note, I think, would be there wasn't a high amount of respondees. We had 9 elected members who submitted a response to the survey, which is just over 17% of all elected members. Pleasing to note that of the respondees, most of them had attended more than 10 sessions, so there was lots of engagement with the members who participated in the survey. And the majority of the members that responded to the survey indicated that they thought the training so far had been very useful or somewhat useful in helping them to carry out their duties and their role. So we also asked what the most valuable topics were that were covered in the training. The one that came out top was code of conduct. So this is why we're aiming to provide that session again in the next couple of months. Planning also came up. So again, we'll be looking to work with colleagues in the planning department to arrange further training. And then the other feedback that we had was all well matched, really. So we had Welsh language, social care, asking for more information about support through democratic services. Finance came up again, bearing in mind this was before we put on the second session on finance and budget arrangements in December. And then we also had corporate parenting, scrutiny, housing and carbon literacy. Again, we did follow that through with some scrutiny training following receipt of the feedback. So we also asked for a bit more of an open response from members to see if there was anything they would recommend in terms of changes to the training content or the format. So a bit of a varied response. We had requests for some more face-to-face or hybrid training, which we can look to support. And there was also, again, a requirement, perhaps if we go back to the introduction to the role, provide some more information on working with officers and the procedures and meetings in general. There was a request to try and keep the sessions short and sweet, so looking at potentially an hour long if possible. I think that's quite challenging sometimes when we're covering some of the more complex topics, and if we're allowing for the discussion and participation and people able to ask their questions at the end. And then there was also some feedback on how the training was shared following the training sessions themselves. So we did try using a Teams group previously, so I don't think that has been as successful as we would have liked. So we're currently looking at other options where that could be supported, potentially having a space on the intranet where members can access and have access to the recordings of the training there. Potentially we could consider a private YouTube channel. So we are looking at options, and I think we would come back to the committee with some suggestions on that. The other aspect of learning for members to access when they're able to would be looking at some more provision of e-learning modules too. So we also asked members how frequently they would like to have training provided to them. And it was a bit of an even match. Once a quarter came out highest, and then once a month was the next option that people selected. We also asked again about any topics that have already been covered that would like to be run again as a refresher. So that is just the representation of the same information in a different format for members. And we also had a question on what training topics councillors would like to see covered in future sessions. So again, planning, enforcement and building control came up. And then we had individual requests really for quite a few different areas there, some of which we've already covered off. So code of conduct, capital programme, financial management, and some of them are in development. We will be looking at governance arrangements and planning again over the next 6 months. We also asked if there was anything in general that members would like to suggest for improving the training. So that repetition of some of the information we've already covered. So hybrid training and varied times to allow maximum potential for people to attend. More information about who to contact regarding inquiries. Members also said they'd like an annual opportunity to submit their ideas for training. Potentially looking at providing a question and answer section where we could share information about those that have been asked frequently. And then also perhaps opportunity to do more work on the presentations themselves. So that was the summary of the presentation, councillors. I think the aim of bringing it to committee today was to share the information, gather some feedback and then do some further work. I know that we would be working with the cabinet member on this going forward to develop the programme for 2024-25. I feel it's also worth noting that there are some discussions that cross over into the standards committee about training. So their view is around making sure that members have access to the information that they are able to fulfil the code of conduct. Code of conduct, as you know, is mandatory training at the moment. But I guess there's also a question over whether, as a council, we would look to adopt some more of the topics and sessions as being considered mandatory for Newport City Council. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Leanne. Floor, any comments? Okay, while you're thinking, looking at the graph that shows the percentages, obviously the training for scrutiny chairs comes out at 100%. I guess that's just for the 3 scrutiny chairs that attended, or 4?
It was 4 that
Four.
attended there, yeah. So small number, but it was full attendance.
So what about training for chairs of other committees, such as this, such as the many other committees there are? How does the training for scrutiny chairs, say, differ from chairs of other committees?
I think there is a slight, well, obviously chairing is a skill in itself, so we could certainly look to run something for all chairs on chairing and facilitating the meetings. But I think this particular topic was focused on the role of scrutiny itself, which has a specific term of reference, and how the chairs support their members to develop their programmes of work, to carry out effective questioning, and to think about how it maps back to the relevant legislation. But certainly an opportunity if we could think about, you know, another session that would be more inclusive and focus on that in general.
Well, you asked a question about chairs of other committees, and as you know, I chair licensing. I mean, I do undergo the training which is offered there, but it's about the specifics of the laws around licensing.
Not the chairs of the...
No,
Yeah.
no.
What's that?
I feel like I've missed out on a lot of training. The simple reason is, correct me if I'm wrong, the training starts around about 4 o'clock. Normally
Yeah,
on
quite.
average,
Yeah, absolutely.
And-
Cost on this 4 or 5.
because I've got a day job, I can't get to most of these training sessions. I really do feel like I've missed out on.
Well, one of the answers to that would be getting access to the training material.
Yeah, so if I could access it later, that would be fine, yeah. And you could show that I've accessed it as well.
I think that's one of the challenges, Councillor Sterry. So although we can, there are other options for us to share the information. What we're trying to work out is a possible way of having that recorded, so that, you know, that is part of the members' monitoring record then, where they've completed the attendance.
I had an email come through and I seen it on Sunday, and so it was a training session. Whether I do it or not, I done it, but it also showed that I registered. It was 70% from the council, so there must be some sort of ways of doing it.
Well, just basically, I think, again, chair is one of the, as planning, I think chairing is different to where, is different at every committee. It's all according what the chair of, do you know what I mean? So yeah, it's
Some basic principles, but
yeah,
the dynamics of it.
yeah. So yeah, any training, I think, for any chair is good.
Can see any hands up? Any other comments?
Just chair, this particular chair with this particular committee we're in this morning. I think the chair of this one, Mrs. O, this is not a scrutiny committee. Planning is dealt with very strict legislation, as is actually committee. But you seem to miss out because you don't quite fall into any of those roles, so you don't have a heavy legislation load to carry. So this is a free-flowing committee, if you like, but the other ones are much more focused.
I do note that you invited me to a meeting.
It's always a pleasure to see you again.
Yeah, you can say that now. Thank you. Okay, any other? Okay, if we've done, so the proposal was to note the report summarising training delivered in 23-24 and consider the planned approach to member training for 2020-25.
We take the sessions at the moment.
This one.
I've got one, but I'll send it to you to Leah directly.
If you want to appear it.
I'm sorry, I'm just thinking about petitions. Seems to be public the public have more of an interest in petitions these days.
Okay.
And I think there was some information several years ago. But to be quite honest, I can't remember the route that was talked about then.
Okay. Item 8, final independent remuneration report. Information only. Update.
Thanks, Chair.
No.
Yeah.
Noted. 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 Leanne, sorry, do you have anything to say before we note it?
Sorry, I thought you had asked about the item agenda 8, Chair, about the independent remuneration report. That's me again.
Absolutely, that's we're on agenda item 8. Is it?
Okay.
Do
Yeah.
Do we just note it, or is there anything you wish to say?
No, it was just, as you say, to note the report and to note that it will be going to full council. And obviously this was shared with the committee in its draft form before Christmas as part of the consultation.
Okay, thank you. Everything we've all been waiting for, the forward work programme.
Thanks, Chair. Me again, I will just share my screen, hopefully quicker than last time. There we are. So this is currently being developed as the programme of work for 24-25. So some of the items that we've talked about today are part of the draft programme before we present it to committee at the next meeting. So for the next meeting, we've got the Model Constitution update, which Mike's already talked through today. We will also be presenting a proposal to committee on the Register of Interests. So this is a document and an internal process that hasn't been updated for some time. So we'll just be bringing back some examples of best practice and looking to improve that going forward. We'd also look to share with the committee an update on meeting records, again thinking about this hasn't been considered probably since local elections when we did some work on it there, so having another review and update of that. Member survey results. So I know we were looking to do some further work with members and bring back the information and feedback, particularly linked to ward meetings this time. So we've been through that annual round and ward members have had the opportunity to hold 2 supported ward meetings. So just having a consideration for how that's been and what improvements we can make going forward. And then we will be presenting the full report next time on the work programme. So just looking through to later dates. So September 2024, we'll be looking at our annual reports, which are Head of Democratic Services and Democratic Services Committee reports. It'll also be time again for the draft IRP report. And Mike will bring a further update on the Model Constitution. Then autumn, we'll be looking at participation strategy and further updates on the Constitution. And then looking forward to March, member training and IRP. So I guess my question for the committee today is, are there any other topics that they would like to see on the work programme before the report is presented next time?
I couldn't actually see what, I couldn't see the screen, but couldn't you
Sorry.
slide?
Can
Is it
you
possible
present?
to see it?
Could you present the screen and zoom in a bit? Yeah, is that
I
possible?
can make it bigger, of course. Is that any better?
That is considerably better, thank you.
So I think we've got quite full meeting agendas up until September, but there is capacity for more items to be added later in the year. And obviously, you know, we usually have through discussion throughout the meetings, items crop up as well, which we will add to the work programme as we're going along.
Can we be sent that so that we know what's coming up in the future months?
You should.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
Well, it wasn't in the agenda at this time, was it?
No.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to do, Leanne, is if that's referred to in the minutes.
Yeah, of course.
No other points? Thank you, Leanne. Date of the next meeting, Thursday, the 6th of June, 2024 at 10 a.m. I think
There's no D-Day commemoration this year. Is there? We've had commemorations of the memorial on
Yeah.
High Street.
Yeah.
There's no class there. Is there?
Oh, right. I don't know.
I think it's a big anniversary this year as well, isn't there? So there'll be something.
There's a clash of the dates, right?
Yeah, well, you know, it might be that it's held on the Saturday or the Sunday or whatever, you know, just double check that they're not actually holding it on the same date. Or
Yes.
or the right date. you
So
say.
we know that these dates are movable.
Can I mention I may be away for the next meeting?
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. I think we're done.
Are you clear?
Thanks for the report.
Thank you.